Hi, I'm Jean-Marc, a fellow of the Society of Actuaries, and joining me is Timothy Paris, a fellow as well. Both Tim and I spoke at the SOA's Life and Annuity Virtual Symposium, and we wanted to share a little about our experiences presenting at the symposium. We'll also discuss why we volunteer with the SOA on research, continuing education, and also with the professional interest sections. The reinsurance section is why I first met Tim. This conversation is part of the SOA's effort to highlight just how important volunteers are for this organization and the communities they support. So Tim, I know you presented on pricing for sparse data during the Life and Annuity Virtual Symposium. Please tell us about this session.
Oh, thanks, Jean-Marc. Yes, I did, Tuesday afternoon. It was the last session of the day and of the symposium. So having spoken at these events over the years in person, you never quite know what you're going to expect in terms of attendance or engagement with the audience. I was really pleased, actually. There were, over the course of my 30 minutes or so of my portion of the session, I think we had somewhere around 10 or 12 questions come in through the chat box. Most of which, I'm not sure if we answered any on the fly, but most of which I think we were able to cover during the Q&A period before the end of the session. So although it didn't, it's hard to stop and start a virtual session for questions and audience feedback throughout, like I otherwise typically try to do in a live group. I felt like that was a pretty high level of audience engagement through all those questions. And there were some very good questions. So folks were paying attention, thinking about details, thinking about how things applied to them. So I was really pleased with the level of interaction.
Right, so the virtual symposium is a first for most of us. What was some of the interactive aspects that made it different and you know,
I think it was being aware of the, you're kind of at the console, so to speak, and you're seeing yourself on video and you're trying to present your slides and not just be monotonic verbally, but be expressive, but being aware of those questions coming in on the chat box, and to the extent you can, trying to answer them where it wasn't disruptive, and to the extent where it made more sense to wait after. It's a bit of you're almost trying to do 2 or 3 things at the same time and triage the questions and answer them in a way that was compelling. So I think that was the main thing. It was through the questions from the audience that came in online. But again, I thought that went really well. For myself, and I think a lot of us, we haven't customarily done we may have done a lot of audio conferencing. We may even have done some screen sharing, but probably not as much full video presenting of ourselves speaking and with slides. So just cognitively being able to do all that in a way and that was good and responsive and making the audience feel like their questions were heard and responded to, I think is challenging, but I think I thought it went well at my session. I think in having attended all the other sessions Monday and Tuesday, I thought the presenters did a great job with that too.
Yeah, I agree. That was a great aspect.
Jean-Marc, I wonder if you could share some key points from your session that talked about deaths of despair.
Yeah, so although COVID-19 is all over the news these days, the usual causes of death are still going on. And really, for death of despair, there is an unfortunate synergy between COVID-19 and the death of despair, especially for the vulnerable population, as we're learning every day in the news. There is a tie between death of despair and unemployment, and we saw recently this morning the figures for unemployment are around 15%, which is a record since the Great Depression.
Yeah.
I also saw on the news today that a study projected there could be as much as another 75,000 deaths just due to the death of despair because of COVID. So there is really an important connection between the causes of death on an everyday basis that we need to learn about and to understand, so that we can adjust when something new like COVID-19 happens. I think it's really important to understand what happens at the general population level, so we can see coming trends that could affect insured lives, and we can place new information in the proper context for our business and the people we insure.
Jean-Marc, I mean, I think we as actuaries and experienced fellows know that the SOA's key missions revolve around research and education. Can you talk about how what you talked about at your session ties in with some of the broader SOA research on the cost of the opioid epidemic?
Right. So later last year, started Davenport created some great original research on the cost of the opioid epidemic for the U.S. as a whole. $630 billion from 2015 to 2018, and it was expected to cost almost 200 more billions in 2019, with no sign of this decreasing. It was a really big report. It made the news, but I think everybody will find at least the executive summary an easy and very instructive read. So I recommend you read those couple of pages, and it'll open your eyes on the magnitude of the problem that we're facing.
Wow, thanks. Shifting gears a little, Jean-Marc, can you tell us what prompted your decision to volunteer with professional development? And we've got so many ways to do that within the SOA, but you can answer that however you like in terms of the volunteering you've done.
Yeah, it was a slippery slope. It started small, and then it grew from there. I got involved in volunteering for the SOA through the research side of things. I became a member, and I still can't quite remember why, of the reinsurance section research team, I think because they had an interesting research project that I thought I could contribute and learn a lot from. And then I got involved in that group, and it was a very dynamic and interesting group of people. And it was research. The goal of research is not just to do research for intellectual enrichment, although that's part of it, but it's also to share that research with everybody else. So the step to professional development and sharing that research at the meetings was a very natural step.
Thinking about your volunteering work in those different capacities, how do you think that impacts society on a broader scale beyond the actuarial community?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. So I will somewhat dodge it, and I think it's important to understand the personal aspect of the work we do. We sometimes get lost in the numbers and the big picture, but in the end, we're in an industry that provides support for individuals. And so my anecdote is, and what really opened my eyes to that was when I was a baby actuary, my next door neighbors was an older couple, and unfortunately the husband passed away. And the wife knew that I was in the insurance business, and she asked me to help her with her claim forms. And it turns out that their policy was with the company I was with at the time. And it really opened my eyes to the fact that, we're not talking about policies, we're talking about people that those policies will be helping. And I think that was a big eye-opening on the importance of our role and therefore the SOA's role as well in the world around us.
Oh, great. Thank you.
So Tim, I'll ask you the same question. What prompted you to volunteer, including such events as the Symposium?
Oh, well, let's see. Prior to about 10 years ago, I had spent most of my career working as an actuary inside of insurance annuity companies in various functional capacities, product development, pricing, valuation, et cetera. 10 years ago, I joined my current company, which is essentially a consulting firm, service provider. And for those familiar with that, you know that you really need to get out there and network people in order to be effective, not only to bring in new business, but to see your existing clients, stay up to speed with developments, regulatory developments, what's going on out there in the world. So that sounds like a very sort of selfish reason to get involved, but that was one of the things that kind of brought me out of the building, as it were, and it's become pretty regular thing for me since. So I'd say, I try to speak at a session at least usually maybe 3 or 4 of the big symposiums of the annual meeting each year. I try to be able to do that, not only to give the presentation, which is important, but also just to network with people before and after, the informal meetings sometimes are the most valuable ones, even for a few minutes at a time here and there. So that's been great. And then that, as you said, it is kind of a snowball effect that I got involved on the editorial board for the Actuary magazine. I was involved in some of the sections. I was an elected member on the reinsurance section council with you, I think, for a brief period a few years ago. So, yeah, a number of different kind of workforces and things over the years. But I do like I do like speaking at the events and networking with folks, and doing it in a virtual way this year. I'm really glad that we in the SOA were able to keep it going in some way, and I think it was really, really effective.
Yeah, I think one of the aspects of volunteering that I found great and I had not expected is the networking and the camaraderie that comes from, interacting with people from all around the professional spectrum, with all kind of various interests, but all motivated to help the SOA. I think it's a great group of people, very energizing to be with. So, was there an instance when you knew you were making a difference, an aha moment?
Oh boy, it's tricky to think of it. I don't know if I had a unique aha moment, but I think one of the things that surprised me after I started speaking at Symposia and kind of being out of the building a little bit more as an actuary was that I think in the past, although I tended to not do it because I was not in consulting. I worked inside of a company, so I tended to go to events as an attendee and listen and learn some things through the continuing ed and meet my continuing ed requirements. I think the aha moment for me was, after doing this a few times, what I realized is that what might have been my concern in previous years about, oh gosh, I wouldn't want to get up in front of an audience of peers and talk about something because others are so much more expert at it than me. Someone's going to ask me an embarrassing question that I can't answer. That can still happen. It may continue to happen. But what I found way more often than not is that a lot of actuaries are thinking about similar types of problems and want to come together and talk with each other about them. Sometimes you get a hard question, sometimes you get a not as hard question, but I think as the profession continues to try to move forward and respond to changing times and the wild ride that is the financial markets and interest rate levels these days, I think there is a desire to resonate with people. Even among actuaries are people, and we want to network with each other, and we want to bounce ideas off each other, and we want to get some different perspectives on challenging problems. And so I think the aha thing was that so many of us are trying to tackle many of the similar problems, sometimes even the exact same problems, whether it's because we're doing similar types of work or similar types of work at companies in the same industry. So that was kind of I don't know if it was a single moment, but that was one thing that was a real pleasant surprise for me as I got into this, that it's not just about the math. It's not just about the statistics and the formulas and the formality of actuarial science, although that's really important. It's about being able to work with people, being able to help our employers and our principals solve real life problems like the one you mentioned with insurance. Insurance is an essential industry for the world. And we in our way, whether it's, for me as someone, as a data analytics provider in the annuity industry, or you or others in direct writers, reinsurers, we're all part of that. And so that's a really good feeling, especially right now. I think I do also want to mention that the recordings of the virtual symposium will be available for those that couldn't attend, or if you want to look back again at the materials that were covered. You can also expect to see several webinars on life and annuity products and topics that are planned for the upcoming months, so keep a lookout for these.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tim. And I encourage you all to consider attending one or more of these upcoming webinars. The advantage of having the virtual symposium is that you can attend all the sessions, so you don't have a conflict now because they'll be spread out through time, and you have the chance to see all the ones that you would have missed because they were conflicting with something else. So I encourage you to sign up and virtually attend some of those. Uh, and since we're talking about volunteerism, I'd like to point out that the SOA is seeking right now nominations for the 2020 Volunteer Awards. So please consider nominating someone to acknowledge all they do for the SOA and the profession. And it may also be time for you to consider running for a section council. Thank you for sharing this discussion, Tim. I know we both appreciated the opportunity to share our stories with you. And everybody, sign up for the webinars, nominate the volunteer, and stay updated on details of the SOA website. Thank you.
Thank you.